With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. He is one of China's most distinguished diplomats of the past half century. He joined China's Foreign Service in 1966. He was the Undersecretary of the United Nations. He was the ambassador to Japan from China. He has since then become the Dean of the School of International Studies at Renmin University, where he continues to write very influential papers on the direction of China's foreign policy. And so we're all very interested to hear him today speak on China's policies towards its neighbors. Thank you all, and thank you, Ambassador Chen.
Mr. Bradshaw, honorable members of FCC, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today with you. The presentation of mine today is about China's neighbors and China's policy options. China is a country with the biggest number of neighbors. Neighbors on the continent and neighbors across narrow sea strips. On the continent, China has 20-odd neighbors. China has resolved all border issues with them. Only 2 sections of the border between China and India are pending. But the 2 countries have agreed to resolve them on the basis of mutual understanding and mutual accommodation. And before their final resolution, a border management mechanism has been put in place. As recently as last week, the Defense Minister of India stated that that mechanism has been functioning satisfactorily. Satisfactorily, I say, despite media clamors sometimes to the contrary. Well, so one can say fairly that all is quiet on the continent. The same, however, cannot be said with regard to China and its neighbors across narrow strips of the Yellow Sea, East China Sea, and South China Sea. Because of historic reasons, China was the first country to discover, name, and utilize the 4 island groups known now to all of you. The new government, that is the People's Republic of China, inherited this, as well as the 9 dotted lines which showed Chinese people's historic activities over the centuries. Before the end of the 60s and the 70s, no countries in the region questioned that history and laid claims on any of these island groups. All that changed as a result of 2 events, as I see it. Event 1, a report was released in 1968 by a United Nations organ which claimed that the South China Sea is rich in oil and gas reserves. Where there is oil, there is always trouble. That happened at a time when China was busily engaged in what is called Cultural Revolution. At the time, I was one of the Red Guard, like yourself. Well, as I said, at that time, China was busily engaged internally, but while some of the countries in the region had begun initial stages of industrialization and felt the need for oil and gas. Event 2 the Law of the Sea Convention was adopted, which for the first time established what is called the Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ. Article 56 of that convention stated that, I quote, in the exclusive economic zone, the coastal state has sovereign rights for the purpose of exploring and exploiting the natural resources of so on and so forth in the EEZ, which gave the impression, sometimes false, that the coastal state owns everything in that area. I say false because the same convention in Article 121 provides that an island, whether habitable or not, can have territorial water and contiguous zones. What if that island belonged to another country than the coastal country? Here lies the seed of contradiction and confrontation. As a result of the convention, now between China and Korea in Yellow Sea and between China and Japan in East China Sea, a new problem arises. That is, how to divide up the sea strip between them, which is less than 400 nautical miles. Moreover, because of the convention, some countries began to use geographical location and geographical proximity as a basis for laying claims to Nansha Island and taking actions to actually control some of them. I have a story to tell here. I recall that at one stage, the then president of Philippines visited China and met Deng Xiaoping. And that former president raised the question of some of the islands, saying that they are so close to the Philippines, why don't let Philippines hold on to them? And what was Deng's reply? He said, for that matter, the Philippines is not too far from China. Of course, Deng would not mean that Philippines is part of China. What he meant was that geographical proximity should not be taken as a basis for the solution of sovereignty over islands. Well, this situation was simmering over the years, but that simmering situation came to a head in the new century, particularly over recent years. I'd like to give 3 reasons for that development. One, we are now living in a globalized world and in an information age. These 2 factors have changed everybody's life as well as relations between states. They have quickened the space of changes in the pattern of international relations. So now we say the world today is undergoing major transformation and adjustment. They have given rise to what is called popularism and nationalism, both of which are on the rise. There are many ways to examine how the above-mentioned factors affect the issue under purview today. As we are today in the press club, I'd like to mention one. That is the great role of media. I mean, not just written or visual media, but more so the internet. Moreover, the interaction between the media, politicians, and the general public is far greater than before. The result of that interaction is often leads to escalation of tension, whether domestic or between states. And the fact that Asia is now very much the focus of world attention tends to further enlarge any dispute in the region. 2, China's fast rise and our neighbors' reaction to that. While most of China's neighbors regard China's rise as an opportunity I mean, for closer cooperation to achieve mutual development and prosperity. Some of our neighbors regard it as a mixed blessing, opportunity in economic terms and challenge in security terms. As China is in the process of rising, and it will take years for China to be really strong economically and militarily. Some countries that have territorial disputes with China regard these years, I mean now and the coming years, as their last opportunity to take hold of what they believe should belong to them. 3, US strategic realliance or readjustment and the tactics US has employed to achieve that purpose. Since coming to power, President Obama and his government have initiated a major strategic readjustment with Asia-Pacific as its new focus. That sends a signal to countries in the region. Moreover, in trying to achieve that strategic goal, the US government has resorted to the so-called smart power. Smart power in addition to hard power as employed during the Bush administration. What is smart power? As I see it, smart power is a combination of two mutually reinforcing mechanisms. One, making use of outside force or outside countries. Two, exploiting contradiction among countries of the region. As a result of the first, as a security ally, Japan is now being used by the US as its strategic point in coming back to Asia. US is urging Japan to play a greater role in the region in security terms, not just in economic terms, which suits the purpose of the right wing in Japan more than perfectly. Their long-held dream is now possible to be realized. At the same time, the United States is exploiting disputes between China and some other neighbors. Joint military exercise with the Philippines is a case in point. Now, it is no longer a secret that it is in the US interest for countries in this region to quarrel with China, but not to fight with China. All the United States wants now is to compete with China in influence in the region, as reportedly stated by Hillary Clinton. Clearly, intervening in South China Sea is one of the important means to expand US influence in the region and restraining China's influence in the region. But are there guarantees that Japan and the Philippines and other countries for that matter will not misjudge US intentions and carry their quarrel with China too far and draw United States and China into a confrontation? The danger is apparent, and China needs to be alert to that. Now a few words about Diaoyu Island and Sino-Japanese relations. The case of Diaoyu Island is different from those islands in the South China Sea, both in nature and in perception. The island group was occupied by Japan during the First Sino-Japanese War, which of course China lost. According to the Cairo Declaration and Boston Proclamation, as a defeated country, Japan ought to give up these islands and return them to China. Therefore, people in China regard the dispute with Japan over the island group as an issue over history, as whether Japan has really repented and showed it's ready to shoulder its war responsibilities. Therefore, you see the difference in popular reaction of the Chinese people with regard to Diaoyu Island incident as compared with the Huangyan Island incident with the Philippines. I mean, the reaction of the Chinese people is much, much stronger vis-a-vis over the Diaoyu Island than over the Huangyan Island. Another point of difference is the role of the United States. The US, knowing full well the historical background of the island group, twice lumped the administrative rights over the island group with Okinawa and handed over to Japan, while at the same time stating that the US takes no position whatsoever on the sovereignty over the island group. Is it hypocritical? No. Now, sensible person, both in China and Japan, seeing the island group as a time bomb planted by the United States between China and Japan. And recently, the former president of the Defense University of Japan used a different term. Instead of time bomb, he called it a block of ice put between China and Japan by the United States. That time bomb is now exploding or about to explode. Why? That is because of the following reasons. First, since the Plaza Agreement in 1985 thwarted Japan's fast economic growth and expansion, Japanese economy has been in stagnation over decades. Moreover, the Japanese society has lost confidence and direction. It greeted China's rising with suspicion and dismay. The extreme right in Japan took advantage of the resentment of the Japanese people to reorient the country to the right. Tokyo governor's action is cleverly calculated and has achieved the purpose of moving the Japanese society to the right, with the political figures in Japan not opposing him, but vying with one another to show who is more to the right. In my personal view, the provocation over Diaoyu Island is unnecessary and unwise, as the island group has been under Japanese practical control anyway. It only served the purpose, or rather internal purpose, to move Japanese society further to the right. What is more, unlike other democracies in the US and Europe, Japan does not have a fully developed two-party system, one conservative, one liberal. Now we see all major political parties in Japan are conservative. All prominent political figures in Japan are conservative. Again, unlike political life in US and Japan and Europe, Japanese society does not entertain what people call the pendulum effect. We are seeing this in US election. It moves this way, that way, but eventually it will move back to the middle. But that is not the case in Japan. In Japan, history shows the pendulum tends to move only in one direction, and further to the point of no return, as there is no strong restraining political force in Japan to the right wing. Last but not the least, the role of the United States again. Can one now rely on the United States to restrain Japan? The answer, I think, is less certain now. While Japan's foreign minister did not succeed in his European visit, the Japanese have succeeded in having the United States to state repeatedly that the US obligation to Japan extends to the island group. It also got the United States to conduct a joint military exercise with Japan to take islands. In this strategic rebalance, the United States needs Japan just as Japan needs the United States. Nor does a speech to the military and Shinzo Abe's recent statement on the role of Japan's military show that it is not totally impossible for Japan to resort to military means to achieve its purpose and even to go militaristic. Countries in the region need to be prepared. Now, what are China's options? As a former retired diplomat, it is no longer my responsibility to explain government policies. My interest is to examine and explore the contour of the framework of policy options open to China. I see two major determinants: protection of sovereignty and preservation of stability, both at home and abroad. The first is the responsibility of any national state, that is to protect national sovereignty. The latter is the prerequisite of development. China's option must be something less than perfect. It has to be between these two considerations. That explains why, so far, the Chinese government has not taken any proactive action to initiate changes in the status quo wherever the dispute lies. China only responds to what it sees as provocation. The only question one can raise is whether the response is commensurate. Here, the difficulty is that a response on the part of China is often seen as inadequate or even soft internally, while regarded as tough and even excessive externally. That's why I said I do not envy those who now work in the foreign ministry. In the larger interest of good neighborliness and prosperity, the Chinese government has adhered to the following principles, which I believe constitute lines China will not cross, as I believe. 1, China recognizes territorial disputes. China does not seek to provoke incidents and will not be the one to do so first. 2nd, China recognizes territorial disputes where overlapping sovereignty claims existed. 3, China seeks to shelve disputes if they could not be resolved now. 4, China advocates joint exploitation on and around disputed islands. 5, China advocates peaceful resolution of disputes by parties directly concerned with the disputes. 6, China does not seek to recover all lost territory, but is ready for give and take over negotiating table. But I doubt if China will tolerate any new encroachment on China's sovereign rights or actions to reinforce existing encroachments. I doubt. With regard to the issue of Diaoyu Island, I'd like to make the following points. 1, China has all along adhered to the understanding reached at the time of normalization between Deng Xiaoping and then Japanese leaders. However, since Japan no longer recognized the understanding, and now that the status quo over the island has been broken by the Japanese side, China, I think, does not have to respect the status quo anymore. In the prevailing circumstances, I think it is imperative for the parties to put in place a mechanism to avoid accidental clash between patrol vessels of the two countries. 2, Japan has to acknowledge the existence of overlapping claims over the island group. Japan should come to the negotiating table with China. That is the in the interest of not only of China, but also of normal Sino-Japanese relations, and above all, the stability and the prosperity of the region. That, which means to get the two parties onto the negotiating table, that should be the policy objective of China if I were to advise the government. 3, if the United States really intends to play a neutral and constructive role, it should urge the parties to the dispute, to the negotiating table, and resolve the difference by peaceful means. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chun, for that very interesting speech. With that, I'd like to throw open the floor for some questions to see who would like to follow up. And why don't we start here in the middle? Please identify yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Vine. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. Hello, my name is Stephen Vine. I'm very interested to hear what you say, particularly with regard to Japan, and also as to US foreign policy. Now, if you were in a position to, and assuming that there was to be a change of president in the United States next week, and we don't probably know who will be in charge of foreign policy in the US, but if you were in a position to be advising a new president like Mitt Romney on how he should approach the problem, what would you personally have to say?
Thank you. My hope is that after the election, the two countries will continue what was initiated early on between the leaders of the two countries to seek to build a new relationship between what we call the established power and the rising power. Where to start? The best area to start in this part of the world, Asia Pacific. The leaders of the two countries have already acknowledged that China welcomed the United States to play a constructive role in the region. And the US respects China's reasonable interest in the region. I do not quote the exact wording, but that was already acknowledged by the two countries at the highest level. But it is necessary now to put these two pronouncements into practice, to work out a formula that two countries can work together peacefully and constructively for the common good of the countries of the region. That is to say, the two countries can provide public goods to the countries of the region. One thing is freedom of navigation of the region, which China depends very much for its exports. On the question of Diaoyu Island, as I mentioned earlier, the first priority for US is to move back from a position which is more in favor of Japan, to back to the middle, to urge Japan, rather, to come to the negotiating table with China. China is ready to negotiate, but Japan has to accept the reality and come to the negotiating table. And I personally think the first priority over the negotiating table is to establish a mechanism to avoid accidental clash. I thank you.
Ambassador Chen, thanks for that speech earlier. You mentioned that you really wouldn't like to be in the foreign ministry yourself these days, given what's going on. With a change of power that is expected to come in China in the coming months, those who would like to see proactive measures by China, what sort of things are they thinking about, particularly in terms of US power in the region?
Well, first of all, I don't expect major changes in terms of China's foreign policy with the change of people at the helm. I think it's going to be a smooth change, and the major tenets of our foreign policy will remain very much the same, because these are the requirements of China for China to develop. And as far as your question with regard to
proactive, those who want to see China have a more proactive policy in the region, what are they thinking about?
Proactive, I cannot speak for those people who would like China to take more proactive policy. But as I mentioned, as far as I see it, China will not take proactive action with regard to disputes that are existing. We will only react. But our reaction, I think, will be sufficient to ensure that our sovereign rights are safeguarded.
Can you sort of say a little bit more about what that reactive nature might be?
Well, for instance, you are seeing that Chinese vessels, administrative vessels, are patrolling the area of the disputed area of Diaoyu Island. You're also seeing Chinese non-military vessels patrolling Huangyan Dao. I think these will continue, I think.
Jane in the front, please.
Jane Perlez from the Times. In relation to the risk of clashes at sea, how high is the risk and how do you see this? This is obviously in your mind.
Could you speak closer to the mic?
In regards to clashes at sea, how high do you think the risk is? Would you see Chinese naval vessels getting into the
As you have seen, both in the case of Huangyan Dao and Diaoyu Dao, all those vessels that are patrolling the area are Chinese administrative vessels, not warships. I think that will be the same if situation did not escalate. Do not escalate, I'm sorry.
Is there a contingency plan for what would be done if there is, say, a collision of Japanese and Chinese vessels, as would seem to be the concern? I mean, what happens then, regardless of who's at fault?
Simply that this is not what I know of. Thank you.
Over here, please.
Hello, Ambassador. I'm Martin Mertz. I'd like you to help with the historical footnote. From 1945 to 1972, while the Diaoyu Islands were administered by the US actually used the islands for target practice and the like. Did China have any comments or protests on this during the time when it was administered by America? And in 1972, the democracy movement in Taiwan was pretty much born out of the protests against returning the Diaoyu Islands to Japan, because there was a strong feeling in Taiwan that the Diaoyu Islands are administratively part of Yilan County. So do you see the Diaoyu Islands as being part of Yilan County?
Do you see the Diaoyu Islands as being part of Yilan County?
Yilan Xian. Yilan Xian in Taiwan.
Oh, yes. Traditionally, Diaoyu Island is part, administratively speaking, was governed by Taiwan. So we have regarded Diaoyu Island as part of Taiwan. Of course, as Taiwan is part of China, so it is part of China also. Thank you.
Okay. With regards to relations towards Vietnam, we've seen a reluctance on the part of China to conduct talks there, anything except bilaterally. Do you see any role at all, or constructive role, to be played by ASEAN, for example, at least as a forum? And is there a role even for them to get directly involved in negotiations?
Well, ASEAN can play a role to broadly lay out the guidelines for the situation in the region. But it is not ASEAN business to negotiate territorial disputes between China and some of the ASEAN countries. As I mentioned to you earlier, can we expect European Union and the Latin American group to negotiate over the sovereignty issue of the Falkland Islands? Certainly not. the same apply. Thank you.
Let's say that no solution is found very quickly. What happens to Japan's very considerable business and economic interests in China?
You mean, will that affect economic relations between these two countries? Yes, it's going to be an issue which will not be easily resolved. So that has already impaired on the economic relationship between our two countries. If the situation prolongs, I think both countries will suffer economically. So it is in the interest of both China and Japan to find a solution. No, I mean, don't mean to find a solution to the dispute, which is not easy, but to find a way to come to the negotiating table to talk about this issue. The most important thing is for these two countries to come together to talk and not to fight. Thank you. And here is why I expect U.S. to put some restraining influence on Japan so that Japan will not continue to resist any negotiation with China. Thank you.
Gopi Gopalan. I'm a Hong Kong-based journalist. But 50 years ago, when India and China fought, I was here, actually, not in India. But 50 years later, this year, the media and these scholars and not so much scholars, they are nationalists, I said. They are all debating whether China was an aggressor or India was the aggressor. And this Neville Maxwell, a famous London Times journalist, wrote a book called India's China War. Though he reported the war from New Delhi to his paper saying India was the aggrieved party, when the book came 7 years later, after spending time in Beijing, he was sure India was the aggressor. Anyway, you mentioned at the beginning that there are some progress in talks between the two countries. Is there any chance in our lifetime there will be a good solution, though China claims that it has already solved all the border problems with most countries, including Russia? What do you think, prospects?
Well, first answer to that is let what has already passed to be the past. Let's turn over a new page to begin cooperation between our two countries. And actually, the two countries have already agreed to start a new relationship, despite the existence still of territorial disputes over some of the part of the border. The quote when I quoted the defense minister's speech, actually his statement was made exactly on that day when the war broke out. So I think there is a readiness on the part of both India and China to turn over a new page, forget about that past history, and to move ahead with cooperation between the two countries. Well, the same applies to the relationship between China and Japan. Japan invaded China, created a massive atrocity to China, but China will not seek to invade Japan and, well, to punish Japan for that purpose. History is history. Let's forget about history and move ahead for the common good of our two peoples. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. And unless I see one from the audience, yes, Doug, please, our president.
Thank you again for the wonderful speech and answers to our questions, Ambassador. I wonder whether you could just look forward quite a long way and tell us if you think the time will come and if China aspires to lead its neighbors and to be an example and an exemplar in the way that many countries in Asia have looked to different countries historically as examples and as leaders in different fields. Do you think that one day China will lead its neighbors?
As far as I see it, it's not in the pictures. The reason, there are many reasons why. As I had a bilateral discussion a few minutes earlier with my colleague here, China is very much different from that of the United States. I mean, the Chinese people are very much different from the people of the United States. The United States is an immigrant country with people who came to the United States for religious reasons mostly. And the people of the United States has a strong sense of mission, not only to its own country, but to the rest of the world. Just as missionaries sent by the United States all over the world to China during those days to preach what they believe to be the best for mankind. But the people of China do not have that sense of mission. We have, our major religion is Buddhism. Buddhism do not preach, do not try to convert people. That is one reason. Well, but there are many other reasons. If we look back historically, when China was the strongest power in the world, what we wanted from the rest of the world was respect. No other than that. I think Chinese people's sense of want to be respected is very strong. But their sense of want to preach to the rest of the world, to lead the rest of the world, is very weak. It's not there. It's just not in our elements, not in our blood. I don't know if the Chinese people will change. Maybe because of intermarriage between Chinese and Americans and so on and so forth. The China will not be the China we know now. But it's not yet in the pictures. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. On that delightful note, let's all give a hand of applause to our guest. Thank you for coming.